We're very thankful to the Mass Cultural Council for in part being a sponsor of this program so we could bring it to you. We don't charge anything for these Zoom presentations, but we are glad you would take your donations, and we would appreciate it. You can do it via PayPal, send in a check, however you would like. Don't feel obligated, but if you feel the need to do it, we would love it. So I'm not gonna take your time up anymore. You're all muted. At this point, we'll unmute you at the end. Remember, put your questions in the chat. We will be monitoring the chat, so if you're having trouble hearing anyone, Chris will see that and he will know that he needs to speak up. So we are very excited to bring you Chris Harridan. He is the utmost authority on Paragon Park. He is going to tell you some very exciting facts, some history, some things maybe people didn't know about Paragon Park, and his story, how it all began. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Jean. I appreciate that introduction, and thank you to everybody for being here and to the Historical Society for having me back. This is a different experience for me to be talking on Zoom. I'm used to being in person and having some interaction with the audience. That's what makes this fun and interesting. So as Jean mentioned, we have the chat feature up. If you're not familiar with Zoom, if that's not something you're comfortable with, don't worry about it. All you need to do is sit back and listen, and you'll get a good presentation and maybe some interaction. But if you do use the chat, if you are familiar with Zoom, feel free to throw in a question. In fact, you know what, we'll read out a few shout outs. If you do have a minute over the next little bit, if you could tell me where you're from, just type in just the town where you're from. Because one of the great things about Zoom is that we're able to reach so many more people than just those who could come to an in-person presentation. So just let me know where you're from, and we'll talk a little bit about it. One thing I do want to do, and again, if you'll just be patient with us with Zoom as we try it out a little bit, we'll share our screen. Is one of the things about Paragon that people remember was when they saw certain things. Certain things reminded them of the park. Certain things reminded them that it was time to be thinking about summer. And one of them was a TV commercial. So I'm going to share with you the Paragon TV commercial that we probably all remember seeing at some point, mostly on Channel 56 because that was the lower budget for advertising. But this might give you a few memories.
Go Paragon Park, Nantaskitt Beach, now open daily, filled with new rides and attractions, plus excitement on the longest, highest, fastest, thrill-a-minute roller coaster in New England, where bargain days are Monday through Saturday. Ride all day from noon to 5 or 6 to closing for one price. Bring the family to Paragon Park, Nantaskitt Beach, only 18 miles from Boston. Bay State Line boats leave every day from Long Wharf. Buses from Quincy Square break away to Paragon Park. Free admission, free discount coupons at all participating Stop and Shop Bradley's or McDonald's.
There were a few words in there that might strike you. Bradley's was another throwback. Let's play that again, though, just to be sure everyone saw it. There might have been some things you missed.
Go Paragon Park, Nantaskitt Beach, now open daily, filled with new rides and attractions, plus excitement on the longest, highest, fastest, thrill-a-minute roller coaster in New England, where bargain days are Monday through Saturday. Ride all day from noon to 5 or 6 to closing for one price. Bring the family to Paragon Park, Nantaskitt Beach, only 18 miles from Boston. Bay State Line boats leave every day from Long Wharf. Buses from Quincy Square break away to Paragon Park. Free admission, free discount coupons at all participating Stop and Shop Bradley's or McDonald's.
There we go. So hopefully that brought a few memories back of seeing it. That was when you knew summer was coming, when that was on TV. But also people remember seeing Paragon in the car windshield when you came around the corner, and that's what you saw, the roller coaster stretching out before you. So one of the things I'd like to do is just start by sharing some of the video, some of the images that might spark some memories. Oops. Come on, you. Again. Move this out of the way. And we will go into present mode. Here we go. Okay, so as Jean mentioned, I believe she mentioned, I know a lot about Paragon, and one of the reasons I know so much about it is that I'm preparing a book that has been delayed several times. I apologize for those of you who are out there waiting for it. And if my mother is on the call here today, she's been the one that's been the most vocal about making sure I get it done. So it's happening, it's coming. We're just a little bit behind where we should be with it, but we'll have it done soon. So this will contain a lot of what you see today, and there's a lot more to talk about. Some of the things need a little bit more explanation, and we do a lot of photos. One of the great things about this has been how people have been very kind to me in bringing out some photos, memories, things that they really haven't thought about in a long time, but perhaps have been in their closets or somewhere that they have their old photos, posters, memories, t-shirts from when they worked there. Lots of great things that people are remembering. And one of my memories is this photo right here. This person is me. I'm about 15 years old here. And I was hired, or actually I wasn't hired, I volunteered to help the man who was hired to take photos of the roller coaster before it was taken down and reconstructed in what's now a Six Flags park in Maryland. You should know that I'm afraid of heights, but it didn't stop me from agreeing as soon as I was asked to go up and take some pictures here. Or actually, I took some of my own pictures, but my job was to carry the camera bag. And you can see that I've got the bag and I've got a rope that's not attached to anything. My mother noticed that the first time I showed her this picture, but it was a lot of fun and certainly an experience that I'll never forget, especially through this photo. The other reason that I know a lot about Paragon is because of this man right here. This is my grandfather, Frank Infacino, who was a Hull police officer by day, or I should say by night. He worked the midnight to 8 shift, and during the daytime, he was a mechanic at Paragon. He doesn't seem to be working very hard right now in this photo, but he was working the Congo Cruise, Old Red Mill, or Bermuda Triangle, however you know it. What's on his feet here are if I move the cursor, can you see the cursor? Does that work? Okay. He was pushing when you stop the boats before they went up the hill. So I think when you had a long day, you kind of took that job as a place to hang out and a place to be. The other reason, this is him again here working on top of the roller coaster on the left. This is friend Harold Brothers on the right. He was one of the guys that worked mainly on the roller coaster, I think because it was, it probably had the most problems and it probably needed the most maintenance. So he was one of the guys that did that. And because of that, he worked long hours in the mornings after he got off of his evening shift at the police station. But the other reason is people say, well, how close were you to Paragon? What you say it was in your backyard, and as you know, the name of the coaster was the Giant Coaster, and I used to say that I grew up in the shadow of the Giant. Well, this is Paragon, as you know. This is the roller coaster, and over here in the circle, the red circle, are the two houses that I grew up in. My house, my mother and father's house on the right. On the left was my grandfather and grandmother's house, where they lived and where my mother grew up. So we literally grew up right behind or in front of, depending upon how you wanted to look at it, the back gate of Paragon Park. So this was something that was part of my life, something that was meaningful to me. And as a result, people ask, how long has the book been in progress? And I say 35 years, because as soon as we found out that it was closing, that's when you get motivated to start recording memories and start doing the things that you do. So Paragon goes back to 1905. It's the early days of Nantaskitt becoming a resort. This image, this photograph was taken in between 1899 and 1903. And the reason that we know that is that there's nothing here. You can see some poles here that are the electrical poles for a trolley line in the railroad, but there's nothing there. You can see right across the beach to the bay. And the reason we know that this is 1900 is that there was a storm, the Great Blizzard of 1898, that took out a lot of these buildings that were here. And as a result of that, the state saw an opportunity to take over, essentially, some of these wrecked buildings before they could be rebuilt and create a public beach, similar to Revere Beach, that had a full mile of care and concern of the state of Massachusetts. What they did do was took down the wreck of the buildings. There were a few that's the Nantaskitt Hotel, which some folks might remember. It was around until 1955. But most of the buildings that were there on either side of the street, either side of Nantaskitt Avenue, were taken down. That only lasted a couple of years, because what happened was, as people sort of became used to the new reality, they understood that they really missed having some places of amusement. You know, that it might have been kind of a raucous place. It might have been a place that might not have been safe. There might have been pickpockets and other types of unsavory characters around, but they really missed it. So in 1903, this was the first series of buildings that were built in that area. It's a steeplechase, it's called, which was at that time a term for a fun house. Inside were things like the crazy mirrors and slides and things that you typically find in a fun house. And it was modeled on Coney Island. And this was the very first thing that was built there. It lasted a couple of years. The man who started it ran out of money. It was successful to a degree, but he really couldn't get his investment back. And he called upon some help, as we'll see, from a friend who had some money and bailed him out. But one thing that I did like to see was, and that man was the man who created Paragon Park. But the reason I point this out is that you can see it's called the Steeplechase here. It says up here in Nantaskitt Beach Steeplechase, but they were the traditional Yankees. They were bargain hunters. And when they created Paragon Park, they just changed the top of the postcard to say entrance to Paragon Park. There's nothing different here from the other one. They just changed the name. So it's a little interesting because right from the beginning, they were looking for ways to save some money. This is just a view of that same hotel that we saw earlier, that may be a little bit more contemporary. This was in the early 1950s, just before it was declared surplus by the state and torn down. And across the street is Funland Park, which some might remember, with the arcade bazaar and some other outdoor rides. It was separate from Paragon, not owned by Paragon, actually a competitor, a friendly competitor, but still a competitor. They were not associated with each other. So the man I mentioned who took over that steeplechase and created Paragon Park was named George Dodge. He was a millionaire or a wealthy man at that point because he was in the whalebone industry. And that doesn't mean that he was a whaling captain. It meant that he figured out a way to create products from whalebone, which not the actual bones of whales, but a product of the whale carcass that was used for in clothing. It would stiffen dresses. Remember the style back then was those sort of petticoat type dresses that needed stiffening, collars for men's shirts. These were the things that were created and manufactured. And George Dodge had a company called the George A. Dodge Company, of all things, that created this product, and he made a lot of money. But he seems to have gotten bored with the whalebone industry and moved on to try to create something. That's George there. We don't have many photos of George. This was a newspaper account from when he started Paragon. it's really not, we really don't have a lot to see what he looked like, but you can kind of get an idea from that. This was what he proposed, what he created. It was not what was built, certainly. You can see it, they're calling it a World's Fair up here. But it's sort of similar to what ended up happening. There was a central lagoon. There were buildings around it that hosted shows. There was a small figure-8 roller coaster here in the back. And so there were some things that ended up happening, but all of these buildings down here in the front, they were never built. This was not the final layout. And it certainly spread out a little bit larger than it actually was. But up here on the hill, there is a hotel, and that did become part of the Paragon complex. It's called the Rockland House. If you go to the area now, there is a street called Rockland House Road, which would have passed right in front of the building here. It would have crossed sort of from one end to the other of a hill and would go right in front of the door. The reason that this became part of the Paragon complex is interesting. When the state took over Nantaskitt, they created a zone of about 400 feet, or actually 400 feet, that alcohol sales were prohibited in that 400-foot radius. They wanted to create sort of a place that was free of vices and free of this type of activity that was not seen by the purists of the time as being virtuous. So any guesses how far away from the beach the Rockland House is? It's just about 400 and something feet away from where it was. So this was the way to get a liquor license. It also was a way to have a built-in place for people to stay, because travel at this time, around the turn of the century, was not a day trip. It was a long time and a journey to get to Nantaskitt or other places. You took a boat, you took a train, you spent a while, you spent some time there. So having a place that was ready-made, that you owned, was a good thing to do. And that was part of what the Rockland House did. And this is the view from the front porch of the Rockland House on looking over Paragon and what was here. The lagoon in the center, as you saw from the other picture, the tower that was in the middle was there. That's the hotel, the Nantaskitt Hotel that's out there. And then all of these other types of shows, and we'll talk about what those are as we go through, and we can see all of the things that were happening there. The majestic front entrance, this was what was built. So they finally did put up some money and create some new postcards that had this kind of castle-like entrance, which was a good thing to do. But inside too, they tried to get some majestic looking fountains, and these dancing girls were part of the Paragon Cabaret and posing here out on the fountains. This large building in the back, you can see the name up here, Palm Garden, was a dance hall, a restaurant, place that you could come to hold events. A lot of companies, organizations held outings at Paragon during that time, and that was how they were able to do a lot of the business that they did. Was they had such a large location for huge events, for Jordan Marsh, for Filene's, for a lot of the companies from Boston would come and stay in the hotel, have their affair, their reception at Paragon, and enjoy the show. Because the other thing you have to remember, well, this is the inside of Paragon, of the Palm Garden at the top. And then if you look at the bottom, it says Albert A. Golden Manager. And some of you who've lived in the area sometime might remember the Black Rock House in Cohasset on Jerusalem Road. Mr. Golden owned the Black Rock House as well. For a time, he also owned a couple of hotels in Hull, in Nantaskitt, but he was probably more famous or more well-known for owning the Black Rock House, which was another huge hotel right on the Hull-Cohasset line. But what was it like then? This is what I was referring to, where a lot of the attractions at that point were shows. It wasn't really a thrill ride type of place, remember, because we really didn't have a lot of thrill rides. The roller coaster was a relatively new invention, and it really didn't go very far, didn't travel very fast or go very high. But what people were doing was showing or watching shows that transported them to another time and another place. Remember that travel was not something that the average person could do very easily. So there were places that they needed to be able to see and find out about. And one of the things that a lot of parks in the model of Paragon did was they treated it as if it were a World's Fair. There were gondola boats from Italy. There were dragon boats from the Orient. And again, you can always see in these postcards, there's the Rockland House in the back. Fair Japan was another feature that were showing off cultures and places that people may not be able to get to. The Johnstown Flood in Pennsylvania was a natural disaster. It's a little bit like something like for a flood, you'd say Hurricane Katrina is a contemporary version of that, or an event that, again, this is the time, no newsreels to watch a show about. So it was a performance. It was a show. You came to see what happened, and people explained it to you, showed you images of it, and helped you understand it. The Johnstown Flood was a sort of a traveling show. It went to other parks around. These were the kinds of entertainment that people were interested in. The Klondike, what was it like to be in a totally different part of the world? And these were the things that people came to see when they came to Paragon. There also were band concerts and shows. Thousands of people that today we look at that and we think, in the age of COVID, that's an interesting way to be. And it wasn't that long ago that we were all doing this. But this was what attracted people, because it was a place to be, a place to see something that they didn't see. We're going to mark time throughout this presentation a little bit with fires, and that seems like kind of a doomsday-ish sort of thing. But the reason we're doing it is that when fires struck, it was a big deal. And it was a changing of what Paragon offered. This was the time that usually things, when they needed to be rebuilt, they were rebuilt in a way that changed the way Paragon was perceived. It gave new events, new places, new things to do. And 1911 was the first real fire that caused a lot of change to happen. It just so happens that we have an admission from 1911 here, but one of the reasons I wanted to show this to you was that it says Atlantic Park Company. And that's an interesting piece, because if you are reading a lot of the stories that are written about Paragon, there have been some misconceptions out there that Paragon was originally called Atlantic Park, that there was a different place known as Atlantic Park, and it really wasn't. George Dodge, whose signature is right here on the bottom right corner, called his company Atlantic Park Company. I don't know why. I don't know why he didn't call it Paragon. But when Paragon closed and there were interviews with even the Stone family, who was the last family to own Paragon, they told the story too, that it was originally called Atlantic Park and it dated from the 1800s. And it's just not right. It's just not accurate. But we see why that name even came up, because for whatever reason, Mr. Dodge decided to call his company Atlantic Park, and there it was on there. So one of the things that happened was that the fire of 1911, we don't have any photos of it. I haven't been able to find any, but it destroyed a large part of the front part of Paragon, that building that we showed that was the Steeplechase, and this was the roller coaster that was built in its place, the Green Streak. So sometimes if you look on eBay, if you look on other places that sell old postcards, you'll see it'll say roller coaster at Paragon, and it doesn't look familiar to you. And this is why. This was an older one, much before the one that we remember at Paragon, that was built in 1911. It opened in 1912. The gentleman who worked here was a man named Herb Schmeck, who later became president of the Philadelphia Toboggan Company, remember that name, that built the roller coaster that we now know today, and also built the Carousel that we now know today. So Mr. Schmeck got his start here at Paragon Park, which is a very interesting piece of history to remember, and one that is largely forgotten. Philadelphia Toboggan Company is well known around the world and certainly existed before Mr. Schmeck, but he had a strong impact on what happened there, and he learned the business working here on this roller coaster, the Green Streak. That's a view of it from the beach that he started here in 1912. A lot of people came over on the boat. Think about your memories, maybe put them in the chat. I can't, when I have this screen like this, I can't always see the chat, so I'm going to check it in just a little bit. But if you remember riding on the boat, let us know what that was like, because that's something that I think is something that we wish we could go back if you had a time machine, take a ride on the old steamboat. This is not the one that was on the beach or on the side of the road leading into Hull at one point, well, not at one point, for about 40 years. But it was one that looked just like it. It was the Mayflower, and it looked exactly like this. The nameplate, really, it was the only thing that's different. The other thing that's interesting about Paragon, and this is, Mr. Cornwall will appreciate, he was talking about the Damon School in Hull. Hull High School is now occupying the site of where this hotel was at Pemberton. If you were to, this is Pemberton Pier, where the car is here, and this railing. So to give you sort of an idea of where that is, the front door of Hull High School is about, is across the way here. This was the Pemberton Hotel. And the reason that it's here is that George Dodge, the man who owned Paragon, was so successful with Paragon and the entertainment part of it that he bought this hotel that had existed for some time at one end of the far end of Hull, at the very, very tip, as a resort, and owned it for many years, owned it for about 9 years. He owned it when he died, he still owned it. So this was something that just really showed how successful Paragon was, that there were other places and other resorts that came from it. Mr. Dodge also opened a hotel in Park Square in Boston that's now long gone. It's, if you're familiar with Park Square at all, where the transportation building is now, was where his hotel was for some time. That closed when Prohibition came in 1919. So another fire a few years later in 1916. Well, the reason this is significant is that it started to change the look. This is one we do have a photo of. You can see the old Green Streak roller coaster here is pretty well burned out. And across the way, we're looking right across the bay here. There's nothing left here, including the front entrance. These buildings behind here were on the beachfront. This is the bathhouse that was there. Part of that was there right up until 1978. So really everything here was destroyed. Also note right here, a railroad car on the railroad that went behind. And this is the old Carousel, not the current Carousel, but it's in about the same spot of where the current Carousel used to be when it was in Paragon, but it's the older Carousel, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. So with all these fires happening, Mr. Dodge decided to build a stone front on the park instead of relying on wood, which I think was a smart move. So he had it carved, and some of these are not the greatest postcards, but also built where the roller coaster was, this very large Hilarity Hall, it was called, another fun house type building. And if you see these arched windows here, this is the beginning of the building that existed right up until the very end. It was a roller skating rink. It was a video arcade. It was a toy store. Anyone ever go roller skating? If you did, this was your patch that you wore. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of play. It was many things over the years. It was a very versatile building. But it was one of the ways and one of the reasons that Paragon started to change with the times. It was now moving a little bit toward the thrill ride type of situation. You know, the roller coaster, when it was built, Gene and I were talking before we turned on the microphones here, that Paragon's roller coaster at one time when it was built was the longest and the tallest in the world. Wasn't that way for long, but at the time it was, and that was on purpose. They built it for that reason, to be something that would attract thrill riders now. You know, we've moved away from the shows and we're now beginning to get into the theme park, thrill park type of things. But roller skating was another piece of it. It was changing. It was a dance hall by day and then a skating rink at night. So as you can see, the roller coaster as we sort of knew it is here, but it's not very steep. That's one interesting piece. The old Hilarity Hall is there. Still had some of the lagoon here. And to pay attention as we go through these to this type of fencing, which lasted very long throughout the years. You'll see it. But imagine this is your trip to the beach. We think parking is bad now. Imagine if your car looked the same as everybody else's, and some of these guys are parked 3 and 4 in. I don't know how they planned on getting out, but this was what the scene looked like in the 1920s. Nantasket was the place to be, and certainly everybody that could get to the beach found a way to get there. Interesting about cars. That's another piece of the story about what changed at Paragon. This is a view looking into Paragon from one of the hotels, and it's what's called the auto gate. It's something that was new. These cars that are parked here are people who came for the day and parked their car there, or some of the larger vehicles on the side here are barges or buses that brought some people from either other hotels or other places around. So Paragon started to cater a little bit toward people coming for the day, not necessarily staying overnight, staying for a few days. And this was a significant change because this sort of brought us into the era when people could travel. And if you remember, some folks may remember Hurley's Bathhouse, one of the places on Nantasket Beach. There was also one at Revere. Mr. Hurley, John Hurley, had a quote about, they interviewed him about cars and what he thought of this new invention. And his quote was that, isn't it a curious thing that a vehicle that can take people to the beach also takes them away from the beach? And that was the significant piece of it, was you didn't have to stay for a week if you came. You could turn around and go home. So that's an interesting change and a shift in how Paragon and other parks. Remember now, there were so many other similar parks. In Dartmouth was Lincoln Park, Whalum Park, and Lunenburg. Revere had rides. It didn't have an enclosed park, but it had rides. Salisbury Beach. There were places all over because people couldn't travel too far. But now you could. Now you could get in the car and you could take the family to Maine if that's what you wanted to do. You weren't stuck to where the railroad line was. You could drive there. And as we got new roads, people started to go farther and farther away. So the new direction here was, again, a little bit of fire, but also prohibition. George Dodge, as I mentioned, had gotten involved in the hotel business. I got ahead of myself there. Got involved in the hotels, and prohibition had a strong impact on his business model. As people got into cars and were looking for more thrill type of entertainment, they also were looking to, or didn't have the need for the events that they would go to and company outings and that sort of thing. And then when Prohibition started in 1919, 1920, that era, things really changed because Paragon made a lot of money from alcohol sales. And part of that was the business of the hotels and being catered to. People weren't doing that anymore. They could now get in their car and they could go somewhere else. So he sold the business, or didn't actually sell the business, I should say that. He leased the business to two people, Albert Golden, who we mentioned before, and David Stone, who was a fruit merchant. He had some, he sold fruit and other sort of products along. He rented some stores in the front. He took over. He and Albert Golden took over in 1920, the season of 1920. George Dodge died in 1922. At the time that he died, he still owned Paragon. He still owned the Pemberton Hotel, and the Stones and the Goldens leased the businesses from them. Well, they tried to then purchase the business from them, but before they could, the worst fire in the history of the town of Hull swept through Paragon and up and over Atlantic Hill, destroying much of what was there. The entrance to the front beach, all of the cottages and behind the Paragon burned, and there was really a time when we had to start over, or you know, the new owners essentially were buying into something that was a clean slate. This is just an image from one of the buildings behind Paragon. It was so cold on the night of March 28th, 1923, that when you can see the little beast of the roller coaster in the bottom right corner here, the water froze, and that's what actually stopped the fire from continuing even further. But before it was done, it destroyed about 50 cottages and houses and most of Paragon Park. So the Stone and Golden era began with really, you know, building something new and trying something new. And one of the things that they did was they had a new carousel built. They lost a lot of what was already there. This carousel building, if you look at the shape of it, you may recognize it from the current carousel building. And these doors that are flung open here, for many years were not existent. They were the original type of door that were there, but then over the years, garage doors were installed, and the carousel group worked very hard to have new ones made to bring back that old look. And I should probably tell you that I'm on the advisory board for the Friends of the Paragon Carousel, and there's a lot of work to be done, and any assistance, help, volunteer work that anyone would like to do, the carousel is always looking for help, always looking for new ideas and fresh energy. So I'm happy to talk to anyone about that if you'd like. But this is what the carousel looked like. You can see, if you look in the background here, you can see what I was talking about with those doors. Those were just old garage doors that were put up. But this is what the carousel sort of looks like now. It's been restored. Horse by horse, chariot by chariot, they've been repainting and scraping the old park paint and repainting these to restore them to what they looked like in 1928, which was when David Stone and Albert Golden bought the Paragon, or had it made, I should say, and installed it at Paragon. This may bring back some memories. This is what the entrance looked like after the fire here. It was this sort of loud, gaudy type. It was orange at one point, then it was painted yellow. And along the front here is Lehaja's Saltwater Taffy stand. If anyone remembers the Lehajas, that they had two things that they were very good at. One was saltwater taffy. They had the machinery right there showing you how it stretched and how it was made. And then also frozen custard, which is different from soft serve ice cream. I can't tell you what the difference is, but I interviewed Mr. Lehaja's granddaughter, so when I say Mr. Lehaja, I mean the founder's granddaughter, who said that her uncle was an expert and had a clause in a lease or an understanding among the other merchants that Lehaja's at one time was one of the only two places that could sell frozen custard. And he would go out and sample the other people's offerings, make sure that they weren't violating their agreement. And for whatever reason, he was the only guy that could tell the difference between soft serve ice cream and frozen custard. So he was a good guy. But this is what was here on one side, and then on the other side, out of this picture view, is Joseph's, which was there until 2019. It was one of the oldest businesses still along the beach. This is what it looked like in its heyday. Still the Nantaskitt Hotel there, right on the beach. Imagine just sitting out on that porch and enjoying the nice weather. A day like today would have been perfect out there. And then you can see across the way here, the Paragon entrance, the Carousel, the roller coaster stretching out, and then beyond here, the Harridan house way out back. The railroad that we talked about earlier ran along here. This is George Washington Boulevard, but it ran right back here, right up close to the park, but it was gone by now. So this is after the 1930s. And then Funland. We mentioned Funland earlier with those bright colors. This black and white picture doesn't do it justice, but this is Funland right here. So some of you may remember that. So in the 50s and the 60s, remember I said, look at the fencing and look at where you are. When you were looking at the lagoon that had water in it, this is, these kids are sitting on that old fencing, but there's no water here. As Paragon grew, one of the things that they did was they took over more and more of the water and filled it in and put rides over it. But they still kept this wonderful fencing. And this was there until the last really large fire that changed things in the 60s. But you could still make out exactly what the old lagoon looked like. That's the Lindy Loop there, Penny Arcade, and some of the games here. But as you walked along, the flying scooters, the chateau took over for where the Palm Garden was. And then along here, I want to say this says auto scooter, bumper cars, essentially. So again, we're moving toward more of the thrill rides, more of the fun rides. These kiddie rides here were along Park Avenue, which runs behind it here. Again, you can see that fencing along the right-hand side here. These kiddie rides were run by my grandfather, Frank, who you met earlier, his cousin John, who ran the Gun Rock House, owned the Gun Rock House for many years, also ran kiddie rides here in the park. These were his. And he also had this ride in here, which we have a picture of coming up. It was the motorized cars. I forget what it was called. It might have just been called the car ride. But along the way here, you can see there was still a little bit of water, sort of the elegance of the bridge here. They tried to keep up, but didn't really keep up with making it look as nice as they could have. But they did try to sort of preserve that old style a little bit with some of the water here. Eventually, this was all filled in, and there was no water at all in the very end of the years. But again, you can see that the bridge and the fencing is here. There were performances over time. One of the attractions and one of the great things about Paragon was that it frequently had some celebrities. You'll see a few of those come up a little later on, but the Flying Wallendas were part of the group. The Three Stooges were there. We'll see a few others as we go through. Just quickly, I want to walk you through that. Always a good day for an ice cream. And that's the building in the back that was the roller skating rink. So again, we come again with fires. I mean, these people really went through a lot. This was 1955. Hilarity Hall was destroyed. It was never rebuilt. There was always just a ride there. The rotor was there for a while. There were a few other pieces out front. But this was Joseph's. The poor people who owned Joseph's must have gotten burned out 5 or 6 times over the course of, 50 or 60 years and had to keep rebuilding. But they did. They always did. And just quickly, I want to show you that Paragon, we talked a little bit about the changes that happened, and one of the great influences was Disney. We talked about people traveling, right? They were going in different places, not only were they now driving, but as we get into the 50s, they're flying, which they couldn't do before. So now they had many more places to go, many other experiences. So the World's Fair idea really didn't have as much attraction anymore because you could go see it yourself. You could take a plane somewhere. So Disney was the destination then that a lot of people wanted to bring their kids. So one of the things that the owners of Paragon did was try to create Disneyland in your backyard, right? So we've, in this ad, which is from the mid 1950s, you'll see a couple of things, the zigzag and the Himalaya, but right up here in the top right, rides like California's Land of Fantasy. It's kind of like when you see the Super Bowl. You know, they can't talk about the Super Bowl anymore. So they didn't want to put Disneyland in their ads. Someone asked just briefly about the cause of the fires. There were many causes over the years. One of them was the cigarette that was thrown out a window of the dance hall, caught some of the grass around it, and it wasn't seen for a while. Another one was oily rags and chemicals that were stored in a paint shed that were overheated in the sun. Many things, none of them that we know of were set by, people that were angry or not looking to, trying to destroy Paragon. It was mostly accidental of some sort. But the California Land of Fantasy, but in the park, they weren't as afraid to write Disneyland. You can see here, new Disneyland type jungle ride. This was the old Red Mill that became the Congo Cruise and the Bermuda Triangle. In the back here, Disneyland type Turnpike Ride. So they were really playing up the connection to, you could do Disney right here in your backyard. This is that Turnpike Ride that we just talked about, the Disneyland type Turnpike Ride, and also the Magic Mine Train. It's interesting to note that as that got older, it tried to get a little more scarier. And instead of being the Magic Mine Train, it was the Ghost Train. And people were going to jump out and try and scare you. These tracks are just for this ride. This is actually where the railroad bed is, but these are not the actual railroad tracks. They're their own. Paragon also had some zoo type shows and animals. And once a baboon got out and was climbing up the roller coaster trying to get at people in the car. So this sort of thing happened a lot. There were a lot of, there were lions that had gotten out at one point. The baboon climbed the roller coaster. Always seemed to be something happening there. I don't know if these were publicity stunts or if they actually just were that lax in taking care of the animals. But Paragon also then had to branch out a little bit and went into wrestling, midget wrestling. There were all kinds of, in the 50s and in the 60s, the Chateau building that we talked about wasn't used so much for catering and dance hall and ballroom type events, but had a wrestling match, wrestling ring. This is the building we talked about that was the roller rink and a dance hall. It became a toy store for a while, Toyorama, which featured Christmas all year long and was one of the few places, this and down the block at Funland, the Arcade Bazaar was one of the few places that actually had layaway, where you would pay a little bit of money each month for a purchase that you picked out earlier in the year, and then usually right around Christmas time when you were ready to give the gift, you paid it off and you went and picked it up. And that was one of the attractions that they tried to sort of create a year-round interest in Paragon. And this is Funland. We talked a little bit about them. Again, they were a competing park, but you can see they were right next door. There's the roller coaster in the back, and then this strip of stores with the pointed roof at the top here. That was there right up until about 2-3 years ago when it was torn down. But this strip of stores was owned by Mr. Golden for years. We'll talk a little bit about his role when we get to why Paragon closed. This tilt-a-whirl, again, if you're like me and you're online a lot, you're on eBay and you're looking at different postcards, this is advertised many times as a Paragon Park postcard. It's not, it's actually Funland, but it doesn't say that anywhere, but people that you can sort of figure it out. You sort of know. So 1963, this is the last time there was a real large fire at Paragon, and it created the park that we know, or I was going to say we know today, or we remember from way back when. It destroyed a lot of the leftover pieces of that fencing and the lagoon area. It burned the front entrance again. It burned poor Joseph's Pizza. You can see right there, again, Joseph's just seemed to be a casualty of all of these fires. This is what was left over of Joseph's and the front entrance. And then an entrance was never rebuilt. That was one thing that was interesting about it, was that in order to get the park open, this fire happened in April of 1963. In order to get the park open again, they couldn't rebuild everything, and then just never rebuilt. This is the back part of the roller coaster that's behind the front of the buildings there that face onto Nantaskitt Avenue. These are the pointy roofs that we saw. All of this was destroyed. And this was the back. It was known as the Helix. It was a rounded, banked turn that went into a tunnel and came back to, the coaster was longer, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. And all of this was in the back, and this burned. The hill didn't burn completely, just a little bit here. And the Tunnel of Love, the Congo Cruise, the old mill burned completely. So when it was rebuilt, this photo is the one that shows it exactly. Initially, you would come back along here and you would keep going, and all of the circle that we just saw that was burned is back here. Well, they didn't have time to rebuild it and probably didn't have the money to rebuild it. So they made the ride end right here. And it's this sharp curve that comes right in here. And if you, like me, like to ride the roller coaster, it never felt right. It always felt like you were being stopped too quickly and you were turning and you were going this way and you weren't. Well, it's because that's not the way the ride was designed. It was designed to keep going straight, but they instead turned it very quickly, and it never got fixed. It never, they were never able to really make it work the way it was supposed to. In the back here, this building, this flat roof building, was a nightclub that was that old chateau building. When that burned, they just built a concrete block building with, not a lot of excitement to it. And again, the front entrance here that burned, they didn't have time to rebuild. They built two flat roof buildings on either side. Joseph's, again, rebuilt for another time. But they instead just put these flagpoles here. And they didn't rebuild sort of a front grand entrance that they always had. And this is the way it stayed. When I said this is what the park we remember, not much happened between 1963 and 1984. There's Lehaja's again. We talked about saltwater taffy. Then the flagpoles over here on the top left, you can see that was the extent of the entrance. Joseph's, again, when it was in its heyday, you could go in and sit and eat at the counter, not just pizza, but all kinds of food, all kinds of great stuff. That back building was the Blue Bunny, which was sort of a takeoff on the Playboy clubs that were popping up all over the city. You had to be 21 in order to get in. Nothing untoward was going on there. I think they were just kind of creating that vibe that there was, again, more to it than just for families. As you look across, we'll talk a little bit about here, the Congo Cruise, the Sky Ride. These were the rides that were there in the final years. The Giant Coaster was ranked number 6 on the Smithsonian's list of top roller coasters in America. They also added a golf course right under the roller coaster. If you ever played golf under there, if you might remember that It seemed like you were taking your life in your hands because the cars were going right above you all the time. So that was an interesting place to be playing miniature golf. It started out as 9 holes and expanded to 18. And then as we saw in the commercial, we remember Bargain Day at Paragon. Of course, every day except Sunday was Bargain Day. So we talked a little bit earlier, I mentioned that Hollywood came to Paragon in some ways. Judy Garland was there. She came because she was performing in Boston in 1967. For reference, she died only 2 years later in 1969, but she was in September of 1967, was performing in Boston, brought her son Joey, which I think we have a picture of Joey. We do. So there's Judy and Joey on the whip, having a lot of fun. And she was performing in Boston and came to, I remember I showed you the club earlier, the Blue Bunny. Went into the Blue Bunny, and I thought this was a story that people were telling that wasn't true, but I actually did find proof of it. She asked to go up on stage and sang a few songs for the people that were there, which her manager was not happy about because she was giving an uncredited and unpaid performance when she wasn't supposed to be. But she just enjoyed herself that much. She spent the whole day there. And entertain the crowd. So she probably couldn't get away without doing that. Pat O'Brien was there in, what does that say, 1968, performing on the stage. Oops. Anyone know who that is? Come on, Frankie Avalon. I'm not sure who that is, but Frankie Avalon. This was a funny piece. For me, when we found this in an album that was the Stone family graciously were shared with us, I'll tell you about the comment in just a minute, but we put this up on Facebook, and we had been putting up, pictures of Paragon for, weeks, months, years. People would share them, people would comment on them. We might get, I don't know, 100 comments maybe, maybe 24 shares. We put Frankie up there. We had 250 comments and about 50 shares within a day. Frankie still got it. So he was quite popular at the time. But one of the things I did want to mention, we laugh a little bit when we talk about saving money. The Stones were the owners of Paragon for many years. And Larry, who was the son of David Stone, who took over in 1919, and then after he died, his wife and then his son Larry, used to make jokes about doing something to save money. And one of the things they actually did to save money was that after the fire in 1963, they bought these roller coaster cars from another park that had the roller coaster. Paragon's coaster was called the Giant Coaster. It always was called the Giant Coaster. It never was not the Giant Coaster. But the place they bought it from was the Comet. And for whatever reason, they never took the name off. And it always said the Comet until they finally, in the later years, you'll see a picture. They put a plate over it that said Paragon Park. But for years, people have called the roller coaster the Comet. And it's kind of this funny thing that it just sort of became a thing, that they never took it off for whatever reason. I mean, I can't imagine it would have taken a lot to just pry those letters off and paint it, but they didn't. So anyway, that's why sometimes you'll see a picture of it called the Comet, and sometimes you will see, you'll never see the Giant though. That's interesting. It was either plain, it said Paragon Park, or it said Comet. Connie Francis was there. I don't have the year on that. Rex Trailer and Gabby Hayes riding the old mine train on there. If you see in the back up here, Disneyland type, the Magic Mine Train, they still were doing that. The Crazy Cups, always a fun thing. And then Cardinal Cushing. Everyone remembers Cardinal Cushing. One of the great things that he did was Hull has, and still has, the Sunset Point Vacation Camp, which brings kids from all over, mostly from Boston, who don't have an outlet to get to the beach, to a camp where they are able to stay for a couple of weeks and go to the beach, enjoy the outdoors and in a nice setting. And the Cardinal would come visit while they were there. And his birthday is coming up, actually. August 24th is the Cardinal's birthday. So when he would bring the kids to Paragon and would, as you can see, this is a legitimate picture. He went on, like they didn't just get in the car and take the picture and then get out again. He brought them all along and had a lot of fun. And the Stones would host them every year. So this is the Cardinal and a group of nuns taking the first ride on the roller coaster. The Cardinal went on the whip as well. He had a lot of fun, bringing the kids out. And then this is the Cardinal with Mrs. Stone. So this is Larry Stone's mother, David Stone's wife. For many years, Mrs. Stone was in charge. She ran the park. Her son Larry was the manager, but she was the boss, as everyone who worked there could tell you. It was a very much a family business, and she was the head of the family. This is Larry Stone, the man I've been mentioning a lot, with his wife Phyllis. This is the Larry, and Larry is David and Rose's son. And so after Cardinal Cushing died, Cardinal Medeiros took over the Catholic Archdiocese of Boston, and he continued the tradition of coming down to Paragon. They called it Cardinal Medeiros Day. There's Larry there, and these four gentlemen are the Hull selectmen declaring this Cardinal Medeiros Day. This guy on the right here, if anyone in the audience had worked at Paragon, and if you worked in the games, the water game, the ball toss, the pull the string game, any of those games, you might have worked for a guy named Myron Clayman. That's Myron right there. He was a selectman, so that's one of the reasons he's here, but he also worked at the park. He ran the games. And if I interviewed Myron a few times before he died, and if you believed Myron, he ran the park. But I believe it, because he was a very interesting guy, involved in a lot of stuff. Myron's wife and Larry's wife were sisters, which is one of the reasons they were involved. So it really and truly was a family business. There's the Cardinal making, getting the strength tester game in, having a lot of fun. So in its later years, who remembers George? Did you ever get your weight guessed or your age guessed by George? He was a lot of fun too. He always had that same booth in the same spot, and would always he had that enormous scale, which someone bought at the Paragon auction and then later donated to the Carousel, Friends of the Carousel. So if you go down to the museum, I don't think I mentioned that, in the clock tower next door to the Carousel today is a small museum. It's run by volunteers. We're collecting a lot of this memorabilia, and someone who had bought that scale donated it. So you can go and get your weight tested there. Over the years, there were some tragedies. Some folks that tried to stand up in the roller coaster. All the fatalities that we've seen were human error. They were not caused by unsafe conditions. Although if you rode the roller coaster, you kind of felt like it went like this, but it was safe. It didn't. It wasn't because of someone. It wasn't because of that. This is a view just before. Well, it's actually from 1978. If you remember way back, we talked about the fire, and you could see across, and I said there was a piece of the bathhouse that was still there in 1978. That's that piece of the bathhouse. That was destroyed in the blizzard of 1978, which is how I know when this photo was taken. This is the view you saw when you came down George Washington Boulevard. Everybody saw this and got excited. They knew that there it was. There was Paragon. This is that car ride I was telling you about that my cousin John, or my grandfather's cousin John, operated for a time. You can tell what era this is. It's a little older, but a lot of fun. It was replaced by the Indy 500, which was there at the end of, right up to the very end, right through 1984, but a little more modern in the cars. The Caterpillar, that was the ride that had the thing that came over and closed over as it went along. And who has some of these in their drawer somewhere, right? For years, you couldn't go anywhere. If it was in the car, if it was in a summer house somewhere, there was always a drawer with a coupon to save some money on buying discounted tickets at Paragon. These were the tickets that if you happen to know Larry Stone, and one of the reasons Myron Clayman, his brother-in-law, said that Paragon never had any money was that Larry would give away all the tickets because he was just that kind of guy. He was always out talking to people, give them a strip of these purple tickets. These got you on any ride except for the one I showed you earlier, the Indy 500. For whatever reason, they wouldn't take it on that. But he would give away tons of these. My grandfather knew him. When we'd go down, he'd say, go see Larry, he'll give you the tickets. And sure enough, he gave us the tickets, no questions asked. So I can't even imagine how many other kids got those same instructions from their parents and grandparents. So that's why he was giving away the store. And then if you played skee ball, you got these tickets from the skee ball machines and tried to save up for a prize in the arcade. Here we go. You see where it says, you can barely make it out above it. It says Paragon Park. They stuck some letters above the comment to try to make sure people understood where they were. But then this was the final turn as it went around. And then during the bicentennial, the wood there, you can tell they replaced a lot of the wood. Didn't paint it though, but painted the tracks red and blue, the railings red and blue for the bicentennial. The Kooky Castle was another great ride that was there right up till the very end. The Bermuda Triangle was the name of the Congo cruise for a while, again, trying to change it up a little bit, make it look a little better. And then the Devil's Mansion was the fun house, sort of a walk-through, not that scary type of fun house. But some of the rides, the Tip Top, the Trabant, these were, again, when you look at the difference between today or 1984 and the early park, now we're looking at thrill rides. Now we're looking at something that is going to be exciting for people and aimed at kids. They really didn't have any shows here anymore. This wasn't the type of business that parks were in. They did have the kiddie rides though, small merry-go-round and a whip, a couple of other small rides for kids. If you remember the Jerry Lewis Telethon, which again is another thing that it doesn't happen anymore. Paragon was always a place for collecting money for the Jerry Lewis Telethon. That is Chet Curtis from Channel 5, broadcasting live from the stage here. And once I did this in Hull, and one of these kids was here. These are some Hull kids that were there. They must have raised some money, and she could name every one of these kids. So this has got to be the mid-1970s from the outfits. So if you remember that, the Stones would go on to the Jerry Lewis Telethon, probably at like 2 o'clock in the morning to present the check from what was raised. So this is what it looked like in 1984 when we got to the end, when we got to what things looked like as we were thinking about the end. And there's George's stand is down here. But again, this is sort of, you can tell that some things needed a little bit of maintenance. There were some rides that just didn't change the way that they used to. And, things were getting a little bit tired by the time we got to 1984. And so now we get to the final season, which was 1984. And people ask, why did Paragon close? And we boiled it down to 4 reasons, truthfully. One was nothing to do with Paragon itself. It was, if you Google the Haunted Castle in New Jersey, you remember the Devil's Mansion I just showed you? That was sort of a walk-through fun house. There was a tragedy at a Six Flags park in New Jersey where several teenagers were killed in a fire in one of these types of walk-through rides. And as a result of that, the insurance for all types of rides, not just those rides, but all types of amusement rides, went through the roof. doubled, tripled overnight. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of these smaller parks started to close. There was a period in the mid 80s where a lot of these places just closed up. And that was one of the reasons. It was just so expensive to run now that the insurance premiums were going up. The other reason did have something directly to do with Paragon, and that is that Mr. and Mrs. Stone, the couple I showed you earlier, were divorced. They had gotten divorced a few years prior to 1984. And so when you have a family business, it's tough enough anyway, but when you add that layer in, it's even more difficult. And then the next generation, their children, had their own careers, had their own interests, and really weren't interested in taking over Paragon. So as they were nearing retirement age, they were looking for other things to do. And so that was one of the reasons it didn't stay in their family. We mentioned a little bit about the deferred maintenance. It would have cost some money to kind of upgrade things and keep things going if they were to do it. And then the final thing really was the thing that had limited Paragon for so long was that it was on this little narrow strip of land in between the bay and the ocean and couldn't expand and couldn't do much more than it already did. Well, now all of a sudden, that was an asset because the real estate market had turned, and that was now valuable land. So that's one of the reasons. Those are the 4 reasons why all of those things coming together in the fall of 1984. Paragon closed the week after Labor Day, 1984, but we didn't know, nobody knew, not even the Stones, that this was it, that Paragon would never reopen. So it closed and for the season, and nobody thought anything would happen. There were some rumors and some rumblings that they were looking to sell. The deal did come together in late December of 1984, and in 1985, Paragon was sold. The final transaction took place in March. This is Mrs. Stone, the woman I showed you earlier, Larry Stone's wife. They recorded a video that someone sent to me afterward, the day before they closed the sale, or it might not have been the very day, but shortly before they closed the sale. She's in a jacket there. This is March of 1985. And they walked around and filmed the office, and they filmed themselves in some of the areas in the park. And then Mrs. Stone went over to the time clock and punched out for the last time. So that was how the video ended, which was kind of sweet when you think about it. But this was their family business. And for Larry Stone, her ex-husband, he was born in 1919, and his father took over Paragon in 1920. So he literally grew up in the business. That was the only business he had known. The rides were auctioned that summer, Wednesday, June 12th, and everything went. Everything was auctioned. The bumper cars. Remember we talked about the Magic Mine Train? Well, it was the Ghost Train now, and so all of the rides, all of the pieces were auctioned, and people bought them. Or other parks bought the rides, people bought signs, people bought all kinds of memorabilia. And that's some of the stuff that's now coming back. It's now 35 years later, and people don't know what to do with it. And so that's one of the great things about the museum is that people are coming to kind of bring these back so that we have a central place for them. This painting was done by Ann Kinnear, who was a great artist in Hull and a good friend of ours. She kind of combined all of the different eras of everything together. And including right to here at the bottom, the public auction. The public auction, one of the days that will live in infamy, as we say. Here they are auctioning off several rides, including the roller coaster. In fact, I believe this is auctioning the roller coaster because this gentleman right here with his white collar up under the arm of the auctioneer is Mark Mason. He's the manager, the owner of what is now Six Flags in Maryland. He bought the roller coaster for $28,000 and rebuilt it in Maryland, where it sits today and still runs. And that's why as we talked about earlier, that's why I was up there taking photographs, including this one, from the top of the roller coaster as they took it down. so that they could rebuild it. They kind of had a sort of an idea of where it was going to be. What's interesting about it is that the cost, $28,000, seems very low until you start to figure out what it would cost to build new. At that point, it was estimated it cost about $2 million to build a new wooden roller coaster. Any guesses what it cost them to take it down, move it, and reconstruct it? About $2 million. So what they were buying was the nostalgia. They were buying now, they didn't have a brand new roller coaster. They had an older roller coaster. They had one of the wooden classic roller coasters. It's now called the Wild One. The reason for that is that the park, I told you now it's a Six Flags. Back then it was called the Wild World Park. And so they called it the Wild One. But as you can see from this picture, it kind of goes back to the old way that it was. It's not as steep. And the other thing that they did that's very interesting, oh, well, this is the comparison. You can tell, you can see it's not as steep. But one of the things that they did was that this is the way it was when it was first built. So it's got that not very, scary first hill, but they rebuilt all of this back here in Maryland. You remember that part we showed you that was cut off after the fire? They found the plans for that and rebuilt the entire thing. So if you go to Maryland, which I have not done yet, but I would like to, and you ride the roller coaster today, you're not riding the 1984 roller coaster. You're riding the 1962 roller coaster with some modifications, but it's got that back part that certainly in my lifetime, I don't remember because it was gone long before I was around. So that's a kind of a little bonus. As I said, some of the folks bought some of the memorabilia or some of the parts of it. This is actually my brother and his friends. They were folks who owned a restaurant, bought the Cookie Castle and used a lot of the memorabilia in their restaurant, including the huge skull head that they were trying to move. The carousel, I won't talk about too much about the carousel, except that the original developer plan was to keep the carousel on site at Paragon, but for various reasons, it did not stay that way. The plans changed, and in December of 1985, the carousel was auctioned by the developer, not by the Stones. He had purchased it from the developer, and we did find a video of the auction of the carousel. It's the same auctioneer. He's got a fancier jacket, but this guy right here of his left arm, that's me. There I was, right there in the auction. So reporting for you, getting down all the information that we needed. This guy was the winner, Dan Prigmore, and the guy to his right is Paul Townsend. There was a third guy, Dan Levin, who I'll show you a picture of in just a minute. They were three gentlemen who purchased the carousel to keep it in town. You can't see him behind Prigmore, the man in the glasses here. There's a guy right in the back here, Bill Golden, whose name might be familiar to some of you. Bill Golden was the state senator in this area in 1984. His grandfather was Albert Golden, the guy who owned Paragon Park and the Black Rock House. He helped maintain or pull together this deal to get the ride purchased. Essentially what happened is that those three gentlemen purchased the ride. They owned it for 10 years. They were really only supposed to be temporary stewards of it and until it could be handed off to either the town, the state, a nonprofit, something. And it turned out to be a nonprofit that now owns the Paragon Carousel. So we'll finish up here in just a second because I've kept you a long time, but I do just want to share with you some pictures that I think are unbelievable. And that's the moving of the carousel. As you can see, everything was cleared around it here so that this is the old resting place of where the carousel was. There's that blue bunny where Judy Garland was singing way back when. Oh, I meant to tell you before we got to this point, this is Nantaskitt Avenue. They backed the truck up. The Gordon building movers from Hingham were in charge. And they backed the truck up, got it under there and started to move, and the truck started to sink in the mud. Nobody had ever tried to move a carousel and building, because I should tell you that the carousel itself is in there. It's still in there. They took the horses out to get the weight down, but they couldn't figure out a way to move the machinery without destroying the building. So they tried to pick it up all at once and move it. And it didn't go well the first time out. However, they were able to get it going, moved it a little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit further, across the street to the parking lot for a rest while they fixed the place that it was going to, and then eventually picked it up and moved it down the street. Imagine seeing this coming down the street. This is in April of 1986. As you can see, people came out to watch the show because it was quite a show as it just moved down the street. They took down street lights, they moved pieces of guardrail, everything that was there had to be moved in order to get the carousel down. These are the three gentlemen I told you about. Paul Townsend still has his hat on, so he's identifiable. That's Dan Prigmore, the guy who had his arm up with the auction card. This is Dan Levin, who is the third man. He owned the Dream Machine Arcade, which was right here at the time. And then this guy right here is Bill Geary. He was at that time the head of the MDC, which is now the Department of Conservation and Recreation, that made possible the use of the clock tower and the land next door. So this is what it looked like prior to that. It was an unused building that was sitting derelict and was ready for new life. And the carousel, as we now know it, is what's there. So the work continues. This is when I talked about the museum, it's in this clock tower building here. There's also a creamery, Carousel Creamery is the name of it. That is it's a food. We don't have frozen custard like the Lehajas, unfortunately, but we do have ice cream there. There's hamburgers and hot dogs and food. All of that money goes toward restoring the carousel, keeping the carousel operating, and any donations that are received go toward that, because the carousel has year-round expenses and summertime income. And the other piece, the last thing I'll leave you with, is to the far left of this, still in the same building here, but in the far left, is the restoration studio, where this guy right here, James Hardison, is an incredibly talented artist. I don't think I have the photo, but this horse is what's called the lead horse of the carousel. It has the shield, the P.T.&C. Philadelphia Toboggan Company is the name of the company that built this and built the roller coaster. This is a very valuable horse in the carousel world. The main horse, the one with the shield, is the one that is considered kind of the lead horse and valuable. I wish if I had thought more clearly, I would have put what this looked like prior to that, because years and years and years of park paint. When, God bless them, my grandfather being one of them, when they were told go in and paint the carousel horses, they didn't scrape, they just painted and painted and painted. So years and years and years of layers of paint were on all of these horses, are still on a lot of them. If you go down there, there's a couple of them still there. You can see the cracks in it because the paint is so thick. That's just decades of paint. And this one was white. It was painted completely white. The part of the shield here was highlighted, and the saddle was a different color. But most of these details were lost. And James, the artist here, scraped it down, found the original colors, and is painting them one by one by one. He's got about 40 of them done. There are 66 horses on the carousel. He's been doing a tremendous job. His workshop is in the far left here, right under that first window. You can go by and you can just look in the window and watch him work. Get an ice cream, sit on the bench, watch the carousel restoration in progress. it's a lot of fun and it's a great thing to do. That's what I have to present today. I appreciate all of your listening and being here with us. If anyone has anything in the chat, I would be happy to answer. But I also would encourage you to be on the lookout. I'll let Jean know when the book is done. I've been telling people this as they've been asking, you know, when is it going to be done? When is it going to be done? And I keep saying soon, but we have to stop. It's not that we're still researching. We just haven't been able to get everything to come together. But we have some great photos that you've never seen before. I don't put them in this slideshow because the folks that have lent them to us have, you know, specified that they be, you know, used only in the book. So you'll see some pictures that you've never seen before, some old, some new, some that are really, really fun, and some that I think are going to show you some things that you haven't seen before. So I could talk all night. I told Jean earlier before we started the meeting, I could go 3 hours if you wanted, but I think, you know, this has been a great thing for me, and it also helps me clarify a lot of the thinking and to see that folks are still interested after this time, you know, 35 years, 36 years since Paragon has left us. There's still a good group of people out there that are interested in it. So I'll let Jean know when the book is ready. Maybe I can come back and we can do something in person, or I'll let her know when we're doing some other appearances. But it definitely come down to the Carousel. We're still open until at least Columbus Day. But just come down and relive the old spirit there and take a look at what the great work that's being done there. So Jean, I'm good. If you have anything.
Chris, could you stop screen sharing?
I will.
And maybe if we have a few questions, or if somebody might have a fun story you'd like to share with us, please go right ahead.
Oh, I love that. Sure.
You can unmute yourselves. You should be able to.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Oh, Susan.
Are they unmuting? Okay. I don't see anybody unmuting.
No.
Okay, Ruth has. And
I just have a quick comment, Chris. It was a wonderful presentation. My younger son, I think to this day, is still upset that the year that Paragon closed would have been the year that he was finally tall enough to ride the roller coaster. He's never forgotten that.
Oh, yeah, and that's fun because that's something that I think people really, you know, you look forward to that every year, right? Am I tall?
Oh, every year he kept trying to stand really tall to reach the mark, and the year he would have made it was 1985.
And I knew the guys that ran the roller coaster, and they wouldn't fool around, man. If you weren't tall enough, that was it. You were out. That's a lot of fun. That's so he'll have to take a trip to Maryland.
That's what I told him.
Definitely try.
It was
Oh, go ahead, Susan.
it was a destination, the last day of school, and then we'd go there. I went to Archbishop Williams in Braintree.
Okay.
And so I went there a couple of times. Just about everybody from my class went. And I just have like really warm memories of just different things that I did there, from a squiggly painting to, you know, just riding the rides. So it was great.
Well, you know, you bring up something that's really important. I think people who didn't experience it kind of don't understand. Some of them don't understand all the nostalgia. And it was not that it was the greatest place ever in the world, but it was the place that you felt young and you felt like there was fun and your friends were there and there was this idea that everybody was there to have a good time. You know, and that's what made it so special.
And I also remember being really little and riding on one of the cars, the road. I
Oh,
forget
yeah.
what you called it
Yeah, the
or
Turnpike.
whatever, but I thought that was like the best thing in the world. I remember my dad took me on a Sunday afternoon.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah, don't hit the sides, right? They would try to make you not hit.
Yeah.
That's there's a lot of great memories that people have, and when you go to another park, you look for, at least I do. I go to Canopy Lake in New Hampshire, which is probably closest to what it was, and you look for those things like the bumper cars or things that remember, make you remember those days back at Paragon. It's a lot of fun.
Anybody else?
I have a quick question. That was great, by the way. Hi, I'm from Brooklyn, New York, so I know Coney Island very well. And they would talk about the steeplechase down there. And now I realize you use the word steeplechase too. What does that mean?
Absolutely connected. So the Coney Island steeplechase was the original.
Excuse me, Chris.
Yes.
Could you speak up just a little bit?
Oh, sure. Sorry about that.
There you go.
Excited. So I moved away from the screen. So the Coney Island steeplechase was the original. And in the early 1900s, George Tillieu, who started the Coney Island steeplechase, would lease out or rent out like his attractions. You could license it from him. And the word steeplechase became sort of a synonym for a fun house, for that type of fun house. But steeplechase at Coney Island was a whole park. Like it was an enormous, much more than just a fun house. It was an enormous thing, which now I believe is a ballpark, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. Yeah, that's right. But they did talk about like the electric horses or something. I don't know. It must have been a very extravagant thing in the 1900s.
So yeah, so the steeplechase itself was a horse race, you would get on a horse on a track and go around like you were racing. But then the owner was sort of a pioneer in creating rides or not rides, but attractions that people became part of the show. Like one of them was called the human roulette wheel, and you would walk out onto when you came out of the fun house, the floor would start to spin, and you would get thrown in different directions. And the whole idea was to gather around to watch. So you were sort of watching other people
Flying away.
And they would do things like they would have air on the floor that would blow up and kind of lift the skirts of the women.
Oh my God.
He was a master at that sort of thing.
Oh my God.
Because that's a lot of fun too. I think there's some videos of some of his old rides.
Okay, thank you for that information.
I have a question. Wasn't there also a thing called the House of Mirrors? And you went in, it was like a maze and you went around in it?
I believe you're right. I think that
I got lost in it. That's why I think that they had to come and get me.
Oh, I'm pretty sure that yes, you would walk in and it looked like you were walking forward, but you actually, it was a mirror and you couldn't go. There was only
Yes.
no.
But I don't know. I'm trying to remember if that was there or at Whalum Park.
It might have been Whalum. I don't remember it specifically at Paragon, but they had a lot of rides that came and went, or attractions that they would try out, for a season or two, and maybe it, if it didn't go, they might have gone somewhere else. But it could have been at Whalum, or it could have been at Canopy too.
No, I only went to Canopy when I was old. And I was younger when I went into this house of mirrors or whatever it was called, and I just remember I got to a point where I kept swinging my arms around and saying, I'm stuck. There's nowhere to go.
You know, the Carousel is a great place to be married. My daughter was married on the Carousel 15 years ago. Wonderful.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
James arranged it for us and it worked out beautifully.
what a cool thing.
I love it. That's a lot of fun. And those are memories, you know, who else is going to have a wedding album with horses in it, right?
Yeah.
That's a great thing. That's so, it's,
Chris, could you tell us again how people could make a donation to the Carousel project if they're interested in that, please?
sure. You can go in person if you like. If you happen to be in the area, stop in. The Carousel is open every day at noon. Or if you go online to paragoncarousel.com, they also have a Facebook page, but pretty much if you go to paragoncarousel.com, there is a donate button there, and there's also a calendar of events, so it can tell you some of the things that might be coming up for last year, or I shouldn't say that, 2 years ago. We were doing things like photos with Santa and, you know, events during Columbus Day weekend. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll still be able to do a lot of those events this year. So if you go to paragoncarousel.com, there is a calendar section. There's also a donate section. And then there's some, you can track the restoration too. You can look at pictures of the restoration and see what's going on there. So that's the best place to go.
Can you still buy a brick?
You can, yes.
I bought a brick for my daughter. Yep. Okay.
Yep, you can get a brick. And you can also, if you are feeling really generous, adopt a horse.
Okay.
It's probably, you know, more realistic, right?
Maybe if we all pool our money together, we could adopt the tail or something. Yeah, there you go. We'll have.
Chris,
Anybody else? Any questions or stories?
I have a comment.
Oh, great.
Hi, Chris, my cousin, unfortunately, she wasn't able to get on tonight, but my cousin, I believe, was your kindergarten teacher, Helen Freeze, Mrs.
Oh.
Freeze.
Mrs. Freeze was my brother's teacher.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
They may know Mr. Cornwall, absolutely, right?
that's possible. Right. She was, yeah, so she wanted to be remembered to you. I gave him a link, but she wasn't able to hook on tonight.
Oh, that's
So,
no, I remember her because that school environment was very well. We were all very close, even if you weren't, you know, in the same class as someone. It was a small enough school that you knew everybody. So that's great. Please tell her I said hello.
will do. Thank you.
Anyone else?
This was a lot of fun, Jean.
This was great, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me and for wearing the shirt too. That's
Hey, how do you like that, huh?
extra point.
I get go.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Good. Awesome.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. We want to thank Chris. We're going to take a little break with the programming until probably the beginning of September. We'll come back with some more programs, and we're trying to figure out ways to Zoom and do in person. And that's, you know, we've got some technological things to try to figure out to bring that to you. But like I said, we're going to take a little break. We'll be back in September, unless, you know, something exciting drops in our laps. And thank you, Chris. You're going to send me some information, Chris, about the contacts and things like that. When I get the information on the book coming out, I will post that on the Historical Society Facebook page, so you can look for it there. And again, thank you. Have a great rest of your summer, everyone, and we'll see you in September.
Thank you. Thanks, Jean. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Seth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Seth.
Thank you, Seth.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.